Like and subscribe. Serious, what is your most terrifying we need to leave, now random rush of fear you felt? When I was a preteen, a strange man stopped and asked me for directions that didn't make sense. As I'm trying to help him, a van rolls up and the side door opens. I just booked it and never looked back. Damn, I had a similar experience when I was 14. I was walking home from school when a creepy older guy pulled over his work van, got out, was asking me for directions to a well-known local place, and feigning like he didn't understand what I was saying, in an obvious attempt to draw out the conversation. So that alone set off alarm bells in my head, but then he kept looking around the whole time. And I knew he was about to try something. Some lady happened to be walking from her house to her car, so I yelled out, "Hey mom, can you come here and help give this guy directions?" Surprisingly, the lady actually came over, and as she did, she yelled something like, "Your father and your big brothers will be out in a minute. Are you ready to go?" He looked panicked, quickly got back into his car and took off. Once he left, that lady told me she knew what was up and made sure I was okay, before letting me use her phone to call the cops. Turns out I wasn't the only girl he tried to lure abduct. My faith in humanity was both damaged and restored that day. My car was stolen the very night I moved into my new house in a very good neighborhood. The neighbors had warned us that the neighborhood was being targeted at the time. They mentioned a woman around the corner that opened the door for knockers in the middle of the night, and they attacked her and robbed her and almost killed her. We had reported the car stolen and did the police reports when it happened. Well, 2 nights later in the middle of the night I hear a knock on the door and they said, "Open up, it's the police." Well, since I had heard the story about the other lady, I was suspicious and did not answer. I grabbed my kids and put them in my daughter's room because it had access to the roof from the window. I called the police to say that 2 men claiming to be police are pounding on my door. They said there was no police in the area and they're sending a car. Turns out, these same guys stole the car and came back for seconds. I did get my car back because they brought it with. How nice of them. Hope they brought it back with a full tank of gas too. Me, my GF, and her sister were walking around in a local park at around 9 PM. Very safe town, absolutely zero worries. I saw another group doing the same. 3 guys. First I didn't think anything of it, but I noticed that they kept walking faster, and that's when the feeling kicked in. I just told my GF faster, and apparently she was on the same page. BC, she didn't even question it, and we basically ran to our car. The scary part was the 3 dudes sped up as soon as we did, and stopped as soon as we started driving off. Many years ago, me and my girlfriend were walking in Amsterdam at night being wide-eyed tourists. We ended up on a street that was empty. As we walked it to get back to the busy streets, 2 men started walking behind us. They walked faster than we did, and when they started catching up they split up, so they started coming up from each side of us. At that point my whole body was just screaming "Gtfo," but everything happened so fast that running wasn't really an option anymore. I whispered to my girlfriend to stop as they were basically next to us. And we stopped and looked forward with straight backs. They kind of missed a beat in their walking, slowed down, but kept walking and glancing at us and each other. We stood there watching them until they were gone. Honestly, I figured, if we're getting robbed, I'd rather face it. Guess it turned into a weird act that creeped them out instead. A couple years ago I snuck into an abandoned orphanage with a couple buddies. Dumb I know, but drunk college kids find dumb. Step down through a basement window onto a barrel, easy. We get down and walk through a hallway when we notice a drop of blood by our feet. After close examination of ourselves we notice none of us are bleeding. We shined our flashlight further ahead and notice the blood continues into the darkness. Nope, the frick out as fast as possible. Trespassing with someone, something else injured in the basement of this building? No thanks. TLDR, a guy stalked me at work. This was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. It's a bit long, but bear with me. For context, I live only a few streets away from my workplace. This guy came to my floor one day for a team meeting. Ever since then he made a point to pass my desk when walking to the kitchen, which doesn't make sense logistically as the elevator basically opens right onto the kitchen. Keep in mind, this guy is a complete stranger. Nobody had ever seen him on our floor, so my work friends knew he purposely came to our floor just to see me. He would make excuses to be near me whenever I am in the kitchen, egg to get a glass of water whilst I am washing my dishes. He was always alone, never spoke to anyone, only watched me. This happened for about 3 months. One day he happened to be downstairs at the time I finished work. He then knew exactly what time I finish and waited downstairs for me every day. He just sat there watching, waited for us to leave, then went back up. One day I walked out with a friend. We saw him sitting downstairs, quickly walked out of the building and parted ways, assuming he would go back up now that we'd left. Boy, was I wrong. My friend walked off in the opposite direction, leaving me alone. I had crossed the road and was just about to turn to the direction of my apartment when some higher power compelled me to turn around. The feeling that rushed over me just then, I had never felt it before. It was like a mix of all the most negative emotions in the world all swirling into one massive super cloud of fear. When people talk about the flight or fight response, this was literally the epitome of that. To this day I still cannot understand what made me turn around when I generally never do that. I was smart enough to go in a completely different direction so he wouldn't know where I live. He walked a short distance behind, crossed the road and checked to see where I was walking home to. Another male colleague happened to finish work at the same time this went down. Followed him and waited to see what he was doing, stalking the stalker dart. He confirmed that he absolutely followed to see which direction I was going, and then went back into the building once I had walked too far ahead. He would have only need to follow me a short distance to see where I lived. This happened a few more times before I finally reported his ass and got him banned from entering all buildings associated with my company. Turns out he didn't even actually work for my company, external contractor, and shouldn't have even been in my building in the first place. Went to a movie on Halloween when I was in high school with my boyfriend at the time. It was a huge theater where there was a staircase all the way to the top row that opened in the middle of the row so you could sit on either side of the opening. My boyfriend and I sat in the back row on one side of the opening. We were watching the movie and around 30-40 minutes after the movie started, a guy walked in by himself wearing a big sweater and sat on the other side of the opening. He didn't really do anything at first, but he gave me a bad feeling and I felt uncomfortable, but I continued watching the movie. I noticed the guy seemed really nervous and wasn't paying any attention to the movie. I really couldn't figure out why, but he was stressing me out big time and I just felt like we had to get the fuck out of there. I told my boyfriend that I was probably being silly but I wanted to leave. As we were leaving we informed the staff about the guy just in case. Turns out they had been looking for him as people had reported seeing a guy of that description behaving strangely in the parking lot earlier. The police came and he apparently had quite a few hunting knives hidden under his sweatshirt. Was at a rest stop in upstate New York near Troy around midnight. This was before cell phones and GPS and we stopped to use the payphone to find a hotel for the night. On the way back to the car, a couple of random guys approached us from behind asking for directions. I told my wife to get in the car when I noticed 2 other guys coming towards the car from the opposite direction. I hopped in the car and drove away before anything else happened. Might have just been me being overly cautious, but I swear I avoided a mugging or worse by the skin of my teeth. Oh god. You had me at Troy around midnight. That is one depressing city. I remember visiting RPI and driving down a street of dilapidated houses and everyone was just sitting out on their porch staring at me like I was an alien. I was walking by a long stretch of road with no houses. There was a cemetery. A van with 2 guys in it stopped to ask me if I needed a ride. This was in the late 90s, so it's not like hitchhiking was legal. I'm all, no thanks, I'm nearly home. They wouldn't budge. They kept following me with the windows down, kept saying see Monday, just get in. At some point they just stop, and they start getting out. I was just a teen, and they were clearly 20 something. I just took off running. I must have sprinted half a mile to get to an alley and hid by the nearest building near the road. I waited about 15 minutes before moving on to make sure they had given up, so they wouldn't follow me home late 90s, early 20s too. I used to hitchhike in the evenings. The walk home was long if I missed the last bus. I usually got a lift of middle-aged person or a truck driver when hitching. One night those some young guys picked me up. I got a weird vibe off them, and they had me sitting in the middle backseat, so I couldn't just jump if things got hairy. They were talking about using party drugs like speed, so I started talking about my drug use and how I was shitting myself that I could have hepatitis C. A block later they said they were turning off, and this was as close as they could get me to home. I was at a national park on vacation. The layout was kinda like a crater with a room you can walk under almost all the way around. Had this major gut feeling of yeah, not going down there. Later that day a lady was killed from kids throwing large rocks tree branches into the opening edit. State park not national park was this in Hocking Hills cause that happened earlier this year. I was there that day too. Decided to go to Ash Cave instead of Old Man's Cave. Saw ambulances and fire trucks speeding past and wondered where they were going. While in college, I was at a house party. I had gotten pretty drunk and was passed out on the couch. My buddies ran in to wake me and get me out of the house in a hurry. One of the other guys at the party got into a fight with someone, then ran to his car and got a shotgun from the trunk. He started running after the guy who had fought him. I didn't see any of this, but that was the fastest we ever left anywhere. I was at a party my freshman year of college and some seedy people were present. The night was getting very tense, but no fights or anything happened. As the night went on it became very clear to me something was going to happen. I told my friend it was time to leave. No more than 5 minutes after we left someone was stabbed and the stabber was shot. WTF, where did you go to college? I've heard of shit like this happening at really nice schools. Basically always involves drugs. Colleges are huge markets, so a lot of money could be involved. Worst that happened at my schools was on guy I knew having the ever-loving shit kicked out of him because the guys he bought massive amounts of weed and cocaine from decided that he wasn't making them the profits they wanted. My mom and I were walking our dog on a semi-secluded dried-up riverbed. For context, I was probably 7 or 8. A couple approached us, and instantly something in my gut told me that they weren't safe. The man asked some weird question like, "Is it just you and your daughter here?" and then proceeded to say that he took pictures of kids for a living and that he would love to have me model for him. I didn't wait to hear the rest of the conversation because after that I took off, and I'm ashamed to admit, left my mom and dog behind with the creepy guy. My mom was livid, saying how rude I was and how worried she was because she didn't know where I went, but the intense leave now feeling that came over me totally clouded any sort of reasoning. Don't feel guilty. You were the child and more vulnerable in this situation. Sometimes we must be rude to be safe. Predators prey on people's desire to be polite.